Donald Trump is watching one of the most humiliating scenes of his presidency unfold in real time as world leaders move around him, past him, and increasingly without him, building new alliances, new security arrangements, and new diplomatic channels, while treating the United States less like the center of global stability and more like a liability that can no longer be trusted under Trump's chaotic rule. And that is the real story tonight. This is no longer just about one failed negotiation, one reckless threat, or one collapsing blockade. This is about the world beginning to reorganize itself around the weakness, confusion, and self-destruction of the Trump presidency. What is making this moment so striking is how openly it is now happening. France is talking about new coalitions. China is talking about a broader strategic partnership with the Arab world. Spain is strengthening ties with China and reopening diplomatic engagement with Iran. Ukraine is stepping into conversations about maritime security and drone defense in the Middle East. European leaders are preparing for a future in which America is no longer the reliable anchor of Western security. And through all of it, Donald Trump is being treated less like a leader shaping events and more like a problem everyone else is trying to root around. That is an extraordinary collapse of American credibility. And it is happening because Trump has spent years turning the presidency into a spectacle of ego, instability, and grievance. He insults allies, praises dictators, improvises policy through tantrums, and then expects the rest of the world to keep pretending Washington is still a steady hand. But at some point, the world stops pretending. At some point, leaders begin looking at the chaos coming out of Trump's White House and decide they need insurance policies. They need alternatives. They need backup plans. And that is what this moment looks like. The global search for a post-Trump security map. According to the file, French President Emmanuel Macron is now discussing a coalition of nations aimed at restoring freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, describing it as a strictly defensive mission separate from the warring parties. That language matters because hidden inside the diplomacy is a blunt message. Donald Trump, you are not leading this. In fact, you are not invited to lead it. The coalition is being framed as a serious, coordinated effort by countries that want stability without the erratic, self-serving chaos Trump brings into every crisis. It is, in effect, a vote of no confidence in the American security umbrella under Trump. And that phrase, the collapse of the American security umbrella, is exactly what hangs over this whole story. For decades, whether one agreed with every American decision or not, the broad assumption in Europe, the Middle East, and other parts of the world was that the United States would at least function as a stable guarantor when things became dangerous. But Trump has shattered that assumption. Under him, America is no longer seen as the adult in the room. It is increasingly seen as the unpredictable actor who may set the room on fire, blame everyone else, and then post about it online as if arson were a negotiating strategy. That is why the meetings in China matter so much. The file describes the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi and the Prime Minister of Spain both meeting separately with Xi Jinping, while China talks in increasingly confident terms about a stronger partnership with the Arab world. Xi's language about peace versus war, unity versus confrontation, and the world undergoing unprecedented changes is not subtle. It is the language of a global power sensing an opening. It is China looking at Trump's wreckage and saying, if Washington is determined to burn down its own authority, Beijing is more than happy to collect the ashes and build influence from them. And that should terrify anyone who still cares about America's standing in the world, because Trump and MAGA love to cosplay as defenders of American greatness. But what they are actually producing is the fastest erosion of American strategic credibility in generations. Trump thinks strength means yelling, threatening, insulting, and posting. Real strength on the world stage is consistency, trust, coordination, and the ability to lead other nations into common purpose. Trump has almost no ability to do that because every relationship under Trump becomes transactional, personal, unstable, and deeply contaminated by his own ego. That is why China's positioning is so powerful here. It does not need to invade anything. It does not need to outshout Trump. It just needs to look more stable than he does. It just needs to look more patient, more coordinated, and more useful to countries that are suddenly unsure whether America under Trump is capable of serious leadership. In that sense, Trump is doing Xi Jinping's work for him. Every childish outburst, every failed bluff, every diplomatic collapse, every bizarre public spectacle is another advertisement for a world less centered on Washington. The same thing is visible in Spain's posture. The file points to Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez emphasizing technology cooperation with China and stressing Europe's unity and importance in a world that cannot be understood without China. Again, that is not small talk. That is a major European leader signaling that the future of global stability, prosperity, and alignment will not revolve around Trump's America. It is a public declaration that Europe is thinking in larger terms now. And those terms increasingly assume that China is part of the picture, while Trump is becoming a disruptive force rather than a reliable partner. And then there is the moral rebuke unfolding in parallel. Pope Leo XIV continues to refuse Trump's intimidation, and that is becoming one of the clearest and most damaging contrasts in world politics right now. The file describes Pope Leo saying plainly that he is not intimidated, that he does not think twice about the ridiculous things Trump says about him, and that his job is to look after people and care about humanity rather than obsess over whatever Trump is posting on social media. That response is devastating because it treats Trump exactly the way serious adults increasingly do, as a noisy distraction, not a moral authority. Trump cannot stand that. He can handle critics who scream back at him. He can even use enemies who insult him as props for his own victim complex. But what he cannot handle is calm dismissal from someone with real moral stature. Pope Leo is not only refusing to be dragged into Trump's swamp, he is also making Trump look spiritually bankrupt by comparison. One man talks about care, humanity, peace, and duty. The other attacks the Pope online, lashes out at migrants, and behaves like a deranged celebrity monarch who cannot tolerate any authority higher than his own reflection. And now that moral contrast is spreading into politics across Europe. Sánchez publicly praised Pope Leo's courage and described him as sowing peace, while others espoused war. Italy's prime minister, according to the file, condemned Trump's remarks about the Pope as unacceptable. That matters because it shows Trump is not just alienating policy elites, he is alienating moral and cultural leadership centers too. He is managing the nearly impossible feat of making himself look smaller than the leaders of Europe, smaller than the Pope, smaller than Ukraine's wartime president, and smaller than China's patient strategic machine, all at the same time. Speaking of Ukraine, that is another part of this story Trump should find deeply humiliating, because while Trump keeps trying to belittle Zelensky, the file describes Zelensky as actively building security relationships across the Middle East and beyond, especially around anti-drone defense, maritime security, and military innovation. Ukraine, a country Trump and MAGA have often treated with contempt, is now presenting itself as a modern security partner with battle-tested expertise that Gulf states and regional actors actually want. Think about how extraordinary that is. While Trump is eroding America's trust capital, Zelensky is increasing Ukraine's value by proving competence under fire. And the file's account of Ukraine's battlefield innovation only sharpens the contrast. Zelensky reportedly described a major success achieved entirely with robotic systems and drones, saving tens of thousands of Ukrainian lives while taking enemy positions without infantry. Whether or not every numerical claim is independently verified, the message is unmistakable. Ukraine is innovating, adapting, and leading in real military terms. While Trump is still stuck in the fantasy politics of personal dominance, Zelensky is talking about future warfare, practical defense partnerships, and real world security architecture. Trump is talking about himself. That is why Trump hates Zelensky so much. Strong leaders expose weak men. Competence embarrasses frauds. Zelensky operates in the language of sacrifice, realism, and national survival. Trump operates in the language of self-worship, grievance, and theatrical control. One builds alliances through necessity and trust. The other breaks them through ego and chaos. And when the world has to choose which kind of leader it wants in a moment of danger, the answer becomes increasingly obvious. The file goes even further, highlighting Zelensky's suggestion that if the United States keeps drifting away from NATO under Trump's influence, a new defense structure built around the EU, Ukraine, Turkey, Norway, and the United Kingdom could become stronger than Russia's military in its own right. That is a remarkable thing to hear in this moment because it amounts to an unspoken declaration that Europe is beginning to imagine its own future with less dependence on Washington. In other words, Trump is not just weakening America inside alliances, he is making allies start imagining life after America's leadership. That is a catastrophic outcome for any president who claims to be restoring strength. And remember, this is all happening while Hungary has just dealt a major blow to Viktor Orban, one of Trumpism's favorite international role models. The file points to Peter Maguire's victory over Orban's Feds machine, which matters not only for Hungary, but for the entire authoritarian ecosystem that Trump admires. The strongman model is wobbling abroad at the same moment Trump is trying to posture at home. The message from Europe is becoming harder to miss. The future belongs not to these corrupt nationalists clinging to grievance and patronage, but to leaders and movements capable of building actual coalitions. That is what makes this such a dangerous political moment for Trump and MAGA Republicans. They have spent years telling Americans that Trump is feared abroad, respected by strong leaders, and restoring American greatness. But what the public is actually seeing now is almost the opposite. World leaders are cutting deals without him. New blocs are emerging around him. Moral figures are dismissing him. European leaders are preparing for his unreliability. China is capitalizing on his disorder. Ukraine is offering real security value where America under Trump looks unserious. That is not global dominance. That is strategic isolation wrapped in red, white, and blue spin. The file also captures Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz, warning that the consequences of the war in Iran will continue to weigh on the German economy and private households for a long time, and that he was not surprised the Islamabad talks failed because the Trump side did not appear to be well prepared. That is a brutal assessment, especially coming from a major European power. It means Trump is not even getting credit for seriousness. He is being viewed as sloppy, damaging, and unready, which is exactly how he often governs. But when that judgment moves from American critics to foreign heads of government, the damage multiplies. It becomes part of the global consensus forming around Trump. He is a destabilizer, not a statesman. And that consensus matters because world order is not just about tanks, missiles, and budgets. It is about perception, credibility, and the ability to organize others. Once enough leaders conclude that the United States under Trump is too erratic to anchor serious policy, they stop waiting for Washington. They start moving. That is what we are seeing now. The map is being redrawn while Trump is still busy thinking he is the marker. That is why the line in the file about a new security umbrella is so significant. Security umbrellas are not built overnight. They emerge when states decide they need new centers of coordination and trust. When multiple players in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia begin speaking that language at the same time, that is not random noise. That is an early warning signal of structural change. It means countries are losing faith that American leadership under Trump is something they can safely bet their futures on. And once that faith breaks, rebuilding it becomes far harder than Trump imagines. He thinks everything can be reset with a louder press conference, a bigger insult, a more dramatic gesture. But diplomacy does not work that way. Trust lost through instability is not easily restored. Alliances neglected through vanity do not automatically snap back. Security structures weakened by chaos do not magically regenerate because Trump wants another good headline. What he is breaking now may take years to repair. There is another striking contrast in the file as well. Pope Leo says his duty is to care about people. Zelensky talks about saving lives through robotics and real security cooperation. European leaders talk about stability, unity, and the long-term economic burdens of war. China talks about coordination and partnership. Whatever one thinks of each actor's motives, they are at least speaking in the language of systems, consequences, and responsibility. Trump, by contrast, keeps dragging everything back to himself. His posts, his grievances, his feuds, his image, his moment, his rage, his insecurity. That is what makes him so dangerous in foreign affairs. He cannot think structurally because he barely thinks beyond his own ego. And the world has noticed. That is the central message of this article. Donald Trump is not simply losing an argument, he is losing the room, not just in Washington, not just with voters, but internationally. The people in the room are finding one another, they are opening other channels, they are developing other frameworks. They are beginning to say quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, that if America under Trump wants to abandon seriousness, the rest of the world does not have to go down with it. That should be one of the most alarming developments of Trump's presidency for any American who still believes the country's alliances, moral standing, and strategic credibility matter, because once the world begins building around you, instead of with you, decline stops being a slogan and starts becoming a structure. So tonight, the story is not merely that Trump is being criticized, he is being bypassed. France is organizing, China is positioning, Spain is adjusting, Germany is bracing, Ukraine is innovating and offering security partnerships. The Pope is refusing intimidation. Hungary has wounded the authoritarian model Trump admires. And America under Donald Trump is increasingly watching from the outside as others begin building the order that Trump's chaos is making necessary. That is not strength. That is not respect. That is not leadership. That is what geopolitical failure looks like when it is still trying to call itself greatness.